something bad. These guys, they call them noise. So the noise could be like the isolation anomalies I just said, that the dirty rats, and the noise could come from like stochastic variance or comes from their algorithm. But they believe the descending magnitude prevails noise, which means they believe under zero settings, the noise, like isolation anomalies, will be small. But does it? So, so if they just use weak isolation levels, and they will have a huge increase in the throughput part, and they will only have a small increase of the noise. So overall, if we look at the red line, which is the overall convergence speed, it actually gets faster if we use weaker isolation levels. But this is only the theory. In the practice, sometimes we will have much bigger noise, and the noise may prevail. It may come from like a bad parameter setting, and maybe some guys just use convex algorithms in non-convex settings like deep learnings, and we may have some failed assumptions, we may have some big system latency and system stragglers, so on and so forth. So although the theory believes as we use weaker and weaker isolation level, we will have better and better convergence speed, actually you may encounter something like this because after some certain point, we just have too many isolation anomalies, and things start to fall apart, and there's no convergence at all. And the worst thing is you do not know where you are. You do not know where you have a tolerable isolation anomalies or just too many isolation anomalies. So we don't know how to do this. And in this paper, we are trying to propose RUSHMON, a real-time isolation anomaly monitoring. So the bottom left part is actually a system. What people really care about is this drop accuracy thing. So it's being affected by the static properties like data properties and some runtime properties like how many isolation anomalies you are getting. And this is being affected by system configurations. So in this paper, as a first step towards this problem, we are trying to work on the RUSHMON part. And we believe as a combined effort of the machine learning researchers and database researchers, system researchers, one day we will have we can just predict the performance of your machine learning system, and we can do automatic parameter tuning. But in this paper, we are just trying to monitor isolation anomalies. And isolation anomalies sounds very familiar in the database theory. So is this problem a really solved problem? I will say yes and no. Because although the problem is similar, we are doing this in a complete different settings. So in the database, let's say e-banking, people only expect very good data consistencies, so you cannot lose money. So people expect very good data consistencies. They will use relatively strong isolation level, let's say serializable or just snapshot isolation or just a little bit weaker than that. So we won't see a lot of isolation anomalies. And of course, because like e-banking application, people are willing to pay a huge system overhead, and they're willing to pay that to prevent all the anomalies. That's for the database context. However, in the large-scale optimization context, because the algorithm is descending itself, so it works pretty well if you don't have a huge number of isolation anomalies. So they will expect a pretty weak consistency, so they will use almost no isolation at all. So you will see a lot of isolation anomalies, of course, and in this system, people are not willing to pay a huge overhead. So, and if we can only tell whether you have too many anomalies or okay number of anomalies, it's okay for them. So just to summarize, this is a very special problem because you are going to see a huge number of anomalies, and we must pay a minimum overhead. So let's start with how to count isolation anomalies. So in the database transaction processing theory, this is called the dependency graph. So each transaction is executing from the left to the right. And so here we have a data A, we have a read A, and transaction 2, we have a write A. And this is read and this is write. They both work on the data A. So here we have 8 here from transaction 1 to transaction 2. And in the meantime, this is called the dependency graph. So we have one vertex for each transaction. We have 8 from transaction 1 to transaction due to the 8 here. So similarly, for these two operations, we have another age. For these two operations, we have another age. And for these two operations, we have another age. So for these three transactions, this is the corresponding dependency graph. And why this matters? Because in the transaction processing theory, the good executions without out of order, reads and writes. So, they believe the formal definition of good execution, they call this serializability, which means in the dependency graph I just showed you, we shouldn't see any cycles. However, in our situation, we will see a lot of isolation anomalies. The dirty rats is just one example. So we are going to see a huge number of cycles. So we believe if we just count how many cycles you are seeing in the dependency graph, this may be a good idea. However, in practice, we have a little bit problem. Let's see whether you want to count simple cycles or non-simple cycles. So the difference is in simple cycles, in a cycle, you are not supposed to say one vertex more than once. So this is the simple cycles, and unfortunately, counting simple cycles is a sharp P problem, which means we don't have an efficient solution at all. So we cannot just do it. And for the non-simple cycles, which allows us to have duplicate vertex in one cycle, we can compute it. It's a p-time problem. However, the thing is, in a lot of graphs, if you just count non-simple cycles, you will have an infinite number of cycles. Let's assume we have this isolation level, we have another isolation level, we have two isolation levels, we have two executions, they have two corresponding dependency graphs, and if we just count non-simple cycles on two dependency graphs, we will have an infinite number and another infinite number. And you cannot just compare these two infinite numbers because they are infinite. So how are we supposed to compare which isolation level is better or stronger than us and whether this is sufficient for our machine learning system? We cannot do that because they are infinite. So instead, in this paper, we propose a conjecture is we can just count short cycles. First of all, this is a very feasible solution because this is in p-time, and actually we can do this pretty efficiently. And the number, if we can have any number, the numbers are useful because they are not infinite, and these numbers are representative. So we have a simple benchmark. So in the x-axis, we verify the synchronization frequency, which means from the left to right, we have weak isolation levels. And in the y-axis, we measure the number of cycles based on their length. So in this figure, we can see the 2 cycles represented by the red and the 3 cycles represented by the blue line. They are representative. So that's our quantification on the isolation anomalies, count cycles, and how can we count them in a minimum overhead. So if we just do this in a most straightforward way, let's see, first of all, we just write down the meta information with all the read and write records. We just write them down, and we build a dependency graph. And on the dependency graph, we just count all the cycles. That's a straightforward way. However, the circle counting part, the complexity is just too big. So intuitive idea is, let's say because the counting part is too time consuming, maybe we can just sample some age in the dependency graph. I call this age sampling technique. We're sampling ages here, so we will have much more complexity in counting cycles. Does it work? Well, it works on some situations, but not ours, because here, just even writing down all the read-write information is very time-consuming. It's an O1 complexity, but remember, we are doing this in a memory. The users are not willing to pay a huge overhead, and they cannot just tolerate this kind of overhead. So instead, we just do age sampling before we write down all the read-write information. So we do not record all the read-write information. We only keep a part of them. We call it age sample, data-centric sampling. So this is the old dependency graph I just showed you. Here we have 3 data, A, D here, and C here. So we have 3 data, and we are only going to record metadata for A and C. So as we keep execution here, we capture this age, and the age is here. But for the data D, we do not keep any meta information at all. And so there's no age corresponding to D, and there's an age corresponding to C here. So I have to say in this toy example, after the sampling, there will be no cycle at all, but that's only because this toy example is too small. Actually, in the real life, depending on how the execution is, sometimes we may have a trillion isolation anomalies cycles, per second. So if we just do sampling, we will have a very good estimation instead. So what is the difference between the traditional sampling and data sampling, and can we have good estimations? So in the graph theory, if we are looking at the dependency graph, the traditional sampling is the sampling age, and our sampling is actually sampling vertices. So both of them are unbiased. However, we have unbounded values, but I will show you the result is just fine. So let's start looking at some experiments. We have two sets of experiments. The first is, so the main target is to tell whether the system converges or not, and which metric is the best indicator for this purpose. So we have 150 different system configurations, and each system configuration is represented as a dot in this figure. So this figure with very different batch size, which is a parameter in the machine learning algorithm, and in the y-axis, we measure how many operations you have to take from the very beginning to the final converge. So in this figure, we can see the batch size is correlated to the convergence speed, but the correlation is not very strong. Simultaneously, we want to compare this metric to, we want to compare a lot of metrics. So I already showed the first. In the second, we want to vary the number of cores. We will see there's almost no correlation. In the third one, we measure the data size. There's almost no correlation at all. And in the first one, the staleness is kind of the latency or synchronization frequency. Here we see as we have more and more, we have more and more staleness, which means weaker and weaker isolation levels. We can observe a slower converge, so there's a correlation between these two, but that is not a very strong correlation. However, if we just measure how many cycles, 2 cycles and 3 cycles per second we can get, we will observe a very strong correlation. So we believe if we just measure these numbers, and this could be two very good indicators of whether you converge or not. And we also try to measure the sampling qualities. So we tried unsampled, age sampling, and data-centric sampling with very different sampling rate. In this figure, we can see in all the sampling rates, the estimated 2 cycles and 3 cycles, they are pretty stable across all the sampling rates. However, if we just take a look at the cycle counting cost, we will see because we keep less meta information, actually our data-centric sampling has much lower overhead compared to with other tool approach. So this is our take-home message. First of all, we observed and confirmed the machine learning's observation, which is isolation anomalies really hurt the convergence rate. We define our anomaly quantification, which is count the short cycles, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, and we have our unified data, the data-centric sampling, which can monitor the anomalies really fast. And our vision is by monitoring, later on we can reasoning how they hurt the performance and try to tilt the system. And of course, a good relationship requires 2 parties. So we believe not only the database need machine learning, the machine learning guys need our help as well. So that's it, and I'm ready to take questions.
So if you could go back to the experiments.
Yeah.
So you argue here, experiments like here, yeah, this. So you argue that staleness is actually like not really strongly correlated. It's just a bit correlated. But like I read papers, it's one from Google. It's called Revisiting Synchronous Gradient Descent, and they argue there that if you increase the number of nodes, your staleness increases with asynchronous gradient descent, and eventually you might end up not even converging.
Yes.
So they argue that staleness is actually highly correlated with the convergence speed there. So are you familiar with that work?
Yes. So intuitively, of course, if you have higher staleness, which means you have a weaker isolations, things start to stop to converge. But this is only one thing. Like you said, the staleness, the number of workers, the data itself, and the synchronization frequency, there are too many factors of that. And of course, they have too many features, and this is not easy to build a system which can predict whether you really converge or not. Actually, we try to concentrate all these out-of-order executions into one number or just two numbers, the number of 2 cycles and 3 cycles, and we believe this is a better correlation with whether you really converge or not.
Okay.
This is a relative number. So his question is, he's asking about the overhead because hardware is supposed to be very fast. So here is the overhead for both the cycle counting and the data collection. So it's the overhead for everything. So it's the overhead of our system at all. And the overheads compared with our components running time against the running time of their system like hardware or parameter server. So as we use the sampling rate is close to 50 or 100, so the overhead is like 1% compared with the overall running time of hardware. So we believe it's okay, just 1%.